Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees, and the Esquimalt First Nations, recently known as Victoria, BC, Canada. This is a question for all the woman-identified listeners. What gets you mad? Like, what really ignites your inner rage? The kind of rage that makes you lose your mind and either collapse in or explode out. And how much more than 100% is it patriarchy? Patriarchy making me lose my mind lately. And so I am delighted to welcome back to the show my dear friend Taraneh Erfan, because we just needed to dish on what it's like to, recognize the amount of anger that is just simmering under the surface of our lives, living under white capitalist patriarchy. B, reconcile with that anger, honor and acknowledge it, validate it, affirm it, without being miserable all the time. And C, mobilize and reclaim agency in a world that doesn't want us, to put it as another Numinous Podcast guest, Sophie Strand, put it so aptly on a recent episode. She was talking about the hardest part. She was talking about how the part she related to most to the Mary Magdalene character in her book, The Madonna Secret. She was saying, the part I relate to mostly is just trying to find my place in a world that doesn't want you. So whether it's academia or the workplace or just society in general, online, TikTok, whatever it is, how do we mobilize and reclaim agency and feel good and feel happy as we become more and more aware of the constant and unrelenting amount of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy there is around. So Taraneh Erfan, we are in good hands with her, and I could talk about this with her forever. Taraneh is a registered clinical counselor and a writer with a degree in expressive arts therapy. She was previously on the show when her book came out. It's called Conscious Grieving, The Path of Awakening Through Loss. And you may have seen her poetry or pick-me-ups on Instagram through her account, Mind on Spirit. Taraneh is one of the presenters at this year's Witches New Year, an online retreat happening on Saturday, October 28th. And I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. But for now, let's catch up with Taraneh. So my dear friend Taraneh, what identities do you lead with now?
I am I am a mom to two magic humans and a pup. I am a first generation Iranian immigrant living on stolen ancestral lands of the Squamish people. I am a poet, a writer, a lover of the wild in people and in nature. And right this moment, I don't know, I hadn't really been thinking about it, but right in this moment, I feel like also I'm very currently aware of specifically my identity as a daughter to also first generation immigrants who are processing their own life as people who've come to this land, specifically from Iran, specifically as someone who is a cis woman born in this body, given that there are so many human rights that are being violated currently in Iran by the Islamic Republic, particularly really harming all people, but really, really strongly harming women and gender nonconforming people. So I think I'm also just really currently very aware of that. At this time that we're doing this recording, it's roughly the 1 year anniversary of the murder of Mahsa Jina Amini and the start of the Women Life Freedom Movement. So I think I'm also just, as you asked that and I like let that question sink, I think that's very kind of top of mind or top of heart for me right now as well.
That makes sense to me. I was going to ask you about that because I was remembering too, as you started speaking, that at last year at Witches' New Year, the revolution had just begun. And in your session, which was therapeutic writing for the witch wound, you were wearing a scarf and started to invoke our witch ancestors and revolutionaries in our lineage. And I was curious. I was asking in my mind, asking you, yeah, how are you and your family holding up? And so I want to ask you, how are you holding up?
In all honesty, it's been like a humongous year of all sorts of collective grief and processing. I think especially as immigrants and people living in diaspora, as people who are first generation. So like I still have strong memories of living there. My parents certainly do, my siblings as well. We still have lots of family that lives there. Sometimes we get news, like internal news from family that is cacophonous with what we hear through social media, certainly like in opposition to what you hear in like mass media. But it's been a lot to navigate. There's been a lot of work. At least I can speak for myself personally. I think my family members have had their own unique journeys with it, but these contemplations of what is our role in amplifying the voices of Iranian people? How much are we helping or hindering with certain aspects of what we bring forward? And turning the kind of the guilt that rises up of like, well, I was able to get out. My family had this made the sacrifice of the immigration, but also had the great privilege of being able to leave, and then really sitting with, yeah, the enormity of that grief and guilt that comes with that, and having to shift that into powerful action and gratitude. And like it's a lot of internal work, and it's, yeah, I don't know, it hasn't been easy.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. When we think about the spirit of revolution and a mass mobilization like the women and girls in Iran have inspired, I wonder how in your own life, in parallel, how's your relationship been with anger in the past year?
Well, maybe this is one of those like macro micro things. Maybe they just happen to coincidentally be occurring for me at the same time, or maybe it's just fucking divine timing. I don't know. Like, for me personally, the last, I would say probably 3 years, I caught this wave of, oh, holy smokes, there's some like, there's, I think it started as sadness and discontent. And the more I excavated, the more I realized that underneath that, there was unrecognized, let alone unprocessed, but like unrecognized anger. And then below that unrecognized anger was a whole other depth of sadness and grief and coming to terms with what truth there really was that was occurring within my life. And so, yeah, my relationship to anger, there has been like a personal element, there has been a collective element, there has been a, how do I acknowledge the anger that is really present, give it some space and voice without becoming this ball of like miserable, negative, like just, oh, yelling, screaming human. Like I don't think that that is helpful either. So learning how to give like a safe container for my anger to be felt, to be expressed, to be explored, to even just like navigated in some way, in doses, so that it doesn't fully take over. And then I'm just like it's not healthy or healing for me to be constantly angry. It's not healthy or healing for my children for their mom to be constantly angry. And yet the anger has been there and has needed space. I think on the collective level, when we talk about the women life freedom movement, yes, peaceful protests and posting things on social media, but it doesn't mean that the anger doesn't come through. It comes through. I think the common theme between the kind of greater collective experience that I've been having and then the personal one has been that both of the angers have come from or have been rooted in or like kind of germinated in the lands of mainly hegemonic ideologies that have to do with heteropatriarchy and the diminishment and the stifling of women's voices and rights, and not just women, but people who are not in the up power position.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's kind of that common thread. And the last several years, it's like my blinders have lifted from in my personal life, realizing how impacted I was by capitalist, colonial, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, like these powers that are in the undercurrent of so many of our lives. But I, in a way, was like, well, of course I stand up for people's rights, and yet like that, okay, we'll make the best of it. We'll make the best of it, which is kind of what a lot of women are taught to do, to make the best of it, despite totally unfair, unhealthy, insane reality. Is like, well, make the best of it.
I imagine, especially as an immigrant woman, you have like these extra layers of you should be grateful that you're only being oppressed in this way.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Isn't that so true? Isn't that so true? And the amount of normalization of oppression that happens, it's like, it's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
It could be way worse. It could be way worse. Oh, you have no idea,
Right.
At least you're not living under the Taliban. It's like, yeah, that's not the measure of success we're going by here. Let's not do that. Yeah.
Let's not. Yeah. So, okay. So what did you learn when you the blinders came off? You realized like, oh, actually under my grief is quite a lot of anger. And underneath that anger is like a different, deeper level of grief, perhaps even despair. What did you learn about processing, about like coming to the realization of just how enraged you were?
How much time we got? Gosh, the learnings have been kind of constant and like rolling. There's been one learning and then another and then another. If I go to the beginning and I think about just the allowance for anger, just opening myself up to anger, to say, to consider that I am not a bad person for having experienced anger. I think that's for me where it began. Someone who was like a prominent figure in my life, let's call this person X. They were someone that was, really involved in my daily life, and they had made it very clear that there was no space for my anger, and that, essentially, if there was ever any expression of anger, that the connection would dissolve. And I think because this person was, I'm, like, this is like a long time ago. I was like, I think about like how youthful and, just, I think in some ways undeveloped or underdeveloped my being was, to the realization that, hey, actually, it's not healthier to be nice and just like have no anger. I think what I interpreted in that relational dynamic was, okay, if there's no room for my anger to be expressed, then I just need to dissolve all the anger within myself before ever having any conversations. And so I was doing a shit ton of emotional labor, a shit ton of internal work to constantly, and I think in some really unfortunate ways, gaslighting myself around the experience of anger, and being like, well, it can't possibly be that bad. Like you shouldn't, or find equanimity, like started like, also at the time, like I was like, late teens into 20s, I was really into the study of Buddhism. And, I think I hooked onto certain aspects of the ideas without understanding the fullness of how important it is for all of our human emotions, including anger, to be experienced. Now, anger being experienced is not the same thing as anger being used as a weapon to harm others. Those are two different things.
Or intimidate, or
overpower, or, take over a space, or minimize others, or get your way, or, all of those things, which are actually very much, as I say them out loud, I'm like, yeah, this is heteropatriarchy that I'm describing, this other form of anger, this like externalized, overpowering, use it as a weapon, use it as a way to win wars of interpersonal and, massive, countrywide things. So now you're thinking of, okay, well, but if it's not that, what is it? What other ways can anger be experienced? And I think anger is like information from our body that something isn't right. Something isn't resonant to my truth. Hold on a minute.
And what's not right? It's not us that's not right. There's something in this environment that's not right. I think a lot of people, especially women and gender nonconforming people, will turn the anger inside. I hate myself, or I'm frustrated with myself. We'll like hurt ourselves. We'll treat ourselves poorly. We'll make reckless decisions. We'll restrict eating. We'll restrict joy. We'll act out or act in because we think we're not right. Because heteropatriarchy, particularly white heteropatriarchy, is so normalized. And I think we see it in like different diagnoses for children. Like boys will get hyperactivity disorders and girls will get borderline personality disorder. That kind of thing. It's like, why are there? Anyway, I'm like getting tangential, but what I think you're describing is kind of like even that next layer of the blinders coming off, that it is okay for us to experience anger, and anger doesn't have to equate with violence.
It doesn't have to, but maybe perhaps it's also like my own upbringing. Like I was born during the Iran-Iraq War. Anger and violence scared me, like if for good reason, you know. And generally, violent outbursts have always been a trigger for me personally in my own life. And so without a lot of modeling of what to do with anger other than, you know, swallow it. And then I think part of like, maybe this is also an unsaid thing, like I think, let's say in my upbringing too, there's like, I have memories of, you know, there's a lot of separation of like roles based on gender in Iran, like, but I think also here too, I wouldn't say that that's, but I'm just remembering like growing up in a household where like we had lots of gatherings and the men sitting around and drinking tea and smoking cigarettes and talking about whatever they were talking about, and the women were in the kitchen and preparing and cleaning, and then after they had fed everybody and everything was done, and then they took it and they went to the kitchen and they're cleaning the dishes, and then the dishes are put away, and then they pour a tea and they sit at the kitchen table while the men are maybe in the living room, just like they're still having a great time. It's not like the women weren't having a great time, but I think parts of those conversations are also like this kind of irritability of like how much the labor goes into even just like a social event for the women, and like the men are just having a good time. And like I was exposed to that. So I think there's also this like undertone of like when you're annoyed, let's say you're in a heterosexual relationship. I think it also works in queer relationships, but just for this example that I'm giving about my life, it was like, yeah, you like kind of like you love your husband and you love your family, but also you do sit around with your friends and you're like, these fucking guys, you know? So it's also like you have that anger, but then the only safe space is in these safe spaces that actually never addresses the original issue.
Right.
You sit and you kind of stew in it a little bit. And then I think about like when I was like a teenager and like, yeah, like total like little mini bitch fests about like being irritated about, you know, something, but not really necessarily working on actually what are the tools to like bring this forward and have conversations that could alleviate the kind of annoyance. I mean, anger is obviously stronger than just the mere annoyance, but let's using it as an example. What is it about there not being a safe enough space for us to have conversations? Okay, so if there isn't equity or equality of voice or something, or if we feel like if we talk about our discontent, we're about to be gaslit because that allows this other party to feel empowered and still in like, oh, you're just being sensitive, or like, oh, women, you know, of course there's like that whole side of things as well. But the issue isn't that anger exists. The issue is that there aren't enough safe spaces and conscious spaces and deconstructed spaces that like pull apart like I don't know
what is actually happening here, the
yeah, like
systems that are keeping us in this.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that I grew up with enough of those exposures and opportunities to really have that happen. And I think that in many ways I was searching for it. So like I studied nonviolent communication. I ended up studying therapy. I became a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher. It's like I put all of these tools in my backpack in order to make the most, the best out of difficult scenarios for conversations to happen, right?
Totally.
And still, it took me years to realize that some of those conversations weren't happening in certain aspects of my personal and interpersonal relationships.
Well, and even if they were, they probably wouldn't work for lots of different reasons, but like you know, I mean, we talk about this in the Numinous Network, and we talk about this kind of thing all the time about how you can't heal an entire relationship by yourself. The other person has to be engaged. And if they're not willing to actually relinquish some of their power, this is just a moot point. Why are you even trying? But the other thing is that so many men, and this is how patriarchy is just shitty for everyone. So many men don't hear women or can't hear anything unless a woman is like yelling or extremely angry, and then it becomes an argument because they have been communicated with in that manner. They've been yelled at by coaches, they've been bullied and hazed, it's like nothing's really important unless you're in fight or flight. Unless there is the threat of violence, then it doesn't really matter. They're not really serious. They're just joking. They're just kidding. It's not that big a deal unless they are in some kind of like under threat. I hear this from so many different men. And I hear this sort of like secondhand through my husband and like his experience in men's groups, that it's like just the constant everyday threat of violence is like how they know something's important. And like outside of that, they're not really responding. So you're in a no-win situation if you're in this like hetero relationship, because you're going to either be gaslit, diminished, like it's not that important. It's not that important. And then you're going to lose your fucking mind going hysterical, and they'll be like, okay, Jesus, what are you so upset about? I had no idea it was this bad. Fine, let's go to therapy. Fine, let's go. Even though you've like asked them, you've made requests, you've communicated, all that stuff. So I think unless someone in the up power position and in a hetero relationship, it's the man, unless that man is willing to relinquish some of that power, feel secure enough in themselves, it kind of doesn't matter how skillful you are. Like you can be so skillful, but they have to be a certain kind of guy. They can't just be some guy. This is, they gotta be better than just some guy. So how did you, in the past year, how did you process this anger? What did you find useful for you in terms of like, kind of getting out of the head and those like, how do I speak better? How am I more persuasive or more clear in my communication? Like what did you find was the next step?
So just like a mini thing about what you just said, like the amount of years I spent thinking, if only I could say it slightly differently, if only I just knew, like, if only I was better, basically, if only I was better, things would be better. The amount of books I read, the amount of therapy I did, the amount of like personal and professional development that went into this. And I think still, even with all of that, for a long time, anger didn't have a lot of space. It was more like, well, if I meditated more, maybe I would be less angry. Or if I process this better in therapy, then it will be. But I think in some ways I still was maybe ashamed of feeling anger, because maybe that part was so internalized, like good girl kind of mentality of like, be nice, be small, be likable, be feminine, be generous, be gracious, like, and I do think that those are really important. And I think a lot of like values around like benevolence and loving compassion still are very instrumental to how I lead my life. And yet I wasn't really looking at how uncompassionate with myself I was being to diminish the experiences of anger that I was having. So for me, it started small. It started with just the recognition that there is anger within me. I'm experiencing it. It's moving through me, or it's in the space between me and life, or me and other people, or whatever, or a situation at hand. And that it has room to be here. It's okay that it's here. I think for me, the doorway to that was grief, because it was like this, it was understandable. Like I was going through like humongous waves of grief, and it's like, oh, it's okay to be angry when you're grieving. So for me, it suddenly like allowed myself to be like, it's okay to be angry. Like let the anger be, and like witness it. And so the first was just noticing it and allowing for it to exist without immediately feeling like I needed to minimize it or contain it, like really small. Of course, once I started to look at it, I was like, oh shit, it's not as small, and like this like little bit of anger that I can just like in my pocket, like fuck. It was like, oh my God. Like then it became like, how do I make sure it doesn't take over? What are the safe ways to contain, feel it fully, don't like, dim it, but not so big that it just it becomes me, or I become it, right?
Or
Like,
I'm consumed by it and I can't see the goodness in the world. I can't see the love coming towards me. I can't receive moments of rest because I'm just ruminating in my mind. I'm pacing the floor and banging I'm running my cup against the prison wall of heteropatriarchy against the
right.
bars.
It's so true.
I don't know
Oh
anything
yeah.
about this.
Yeah. And then, yeah, you have no idea what I'm talking about. I think for me, so what did I do with it? I think one, brought it to therapy. I think that was really healthy, because it was like, hey, here is a safe, held space that is contained within this hour where it can come, and also the therapist can hold it and help like bring me back to a place where I can like, okay, I've dispelled some of it. Now I can decide, what do I want to do with the remaining amounts of it? Or does it feel like it can be contained for now? Can I brush some of it off? Is some of it really living in my body? Do we need to stomp during the session? Do we want to do the big no feelings, like, like those things? So there was elements of it that were helpful to be tooled up in therapy. And then I think there was this part of making sure that it didn't just live in my mind and in the stories I had that were keeping the anger alive. So a lot of the anger that I was experiencing was like reflective of past experiences, not just in the moment. So sure, it could be like something had happened that day that brought anger, but I think a lot of it was like, oh, all of these instances where I was making nice, and I was being a good girl, or a good daughter, or a good sister, or a good partner, or a good whatever. And all of these ways that I was like, just like
Right.
the dissonance of like how I was feeling with what was expected of me. Anytime I had to swallow that, it had kind of
Right. And
filled
so then
itself
you can
a little
find
bit.
yourself like time traveling through
Yeah.
instances of appeasement. And there's so many feelings about that too, about all the ways that we appeased, all the ways that we kind of had reverted escape by getting closer to the very people who were confining us or making us small or indignant towards our full expression. And so it totally makes sense that anger is one of those like very rapid portals or rapid like vortex where it's like, oh, this is just like all the other times when I made nice or I just sucked it up because I just couldn't get through to you. And boom, like, so now how do I get current in it in this moment? Yeah, that's pretty tiring, hey?
So tiring, and required so much compassion, and sometimes I didn't self-compassion that I sometimes I didn't have. And lots of like, oh fuck, I can't believe I did that. And then forgiveness for myself for having done that, and coming to terms with why why I had done certain things, why I had operated in a certain way, being gentle and soft with myself around some of those things. And I think for me, I couldn't do it all in my head. There was just too much of it. And also, like, with the allowing space for anger, there was just like agitated energy within me that needed to go someplace. And yet, because I was in this experience of deep grief, a lot of the time I didn't have a lot of energy. So I've heard, like, fucking Instagram psychologists are like, if you're experiencing anger, just take up boxing classes. It's like, I can't fucking get out of bed. It's not going to help me to do boxing. Like, that feels way too far-fetched, right? I'm not saying that that doesn't work for everybody, but for those who are not at the place where it makes sense to stomp it out or box it out, or, there needs to be some other avenues of like dispelling or expressing or like releasing that anger. And for me, it had to come really gentle, because I was I feel like if I had the energy, I didn't have the energy, but if I had the energy to go boxing, I would have probably hurt myself or hurt somebody else. Like, there was way too much of it. So I really think I had to find ways that the anger could leave my body in much more manageable, what felt safer for me and what was accessible to me based on the amount of energy that I had. So for me, it was walking. Like, I know maybe it sounds like simple or small, but for me, it wasn't. It was just the consistent, the stupid little walk for mental health, but a lot of it was about, letting the anger leave the body. So sometimes it would be very intentional. I would know that I'm experiencing, I would know that I need to go for a walk. I'm, extremely privileged and blessed to live in a place where I live close to trails. So I had a place for it to be held by the elements and by nature. And sometimes I would think about stomping it out. Sometimes I would end up like running for 5 minutes when I was just like, and then be like fucking breathless and like, and like being okay with that and leaving space for that. And sometimes it was just like a walking with a steady, yeah, there is sadness and there's anger here. Here I am with these things. Sometimes I
Hello,
would
anger, my old friend.
hello, yeah. And I would cry about it sometimes, or I would voice note things that I was like, oh, this is what, like, oh, this is what's coming out, this memory or this moment. And or I would, my thumbs would type fast into the notes on my iPhone, which like, could come into therapy sessions or be explored further into journal sessions or become a poem or, become relevant for some Instagram post or whatever. But they were all things that were like, hey, here is something that's moving through me. Let me get it out. So some of it came out in voice, in words, in tears. Some of it came out in the thumbs doing fast work. Some of it came out in feet stomping into the earth. But all of it was about somehow giving some safe container space for it to get out.
Yeah. That thing of being in freeze where you're just like, I can't get off my sofa, but I also experience all this anger and I do want to get it out. In trauma work and somatics, we talk about like, okay, so you want to mobilize out of that parasympathetic dorsal drop where you've got the brake on. Okay, let's mobilize out of it. But I'm often telling clients to really be like thoughtful about that, because what are you mobilizing into? And the thing for me that I'm really working on myself just a little mammal, just also trying to deal
Yeah.
with big feelings, is when I'm in the freeze overwhelm of like I just feel so trapped or confined and I'm going into shutdown. I'm still working on just literally getting myself to stand up. Like
Mhm.
that's the first somatic practice is stand up. Like just literally stand up and then look forward as I walk forward. And I just walk forward in like a tiny little circle. But it's like this is like the ritual of me signaling to myself, I am not prey. Fuck this. I am not prey. And so I am going to like stand up and look forward and walk forward and signal that to my whole self. I'm lucky that I have, a very supportive container to mobilize into. My partner, who's a cis man, gets this stuff, but only because anybody who's listened to our Portrait of a Marriage miniseries knows I like not only almost lost my mind and we separated, but I was like getting vertigo and migraines and panic attacks and things because I just could not. I was losing my mind, feeling so gaslit and unheard. So I think, I'm really lucky now that I can mobilize into environments of safeness. And I like what you're talking about. Like, okay, is that container your phone? A group of friends,
Mhm.
walking in the woods, just like something to move your body. But I'm
Yeah.
also curious, there's like two things that come up.
Mhm.
Number one, we're going into the fall and winter, the dark half of the year, where some people may just naturally feel more confined, either because of weather or like the psychology of darkness, if you're in the northern hemisphere. And and so like what can people tell themselves? I tell myself I'm not prey, but what do you tell yourself or what do you keep in mind about fall and winter? And the other thing is like, okay, once you mobilize and you're like, oh my God, I am trapped in white heteropatriarchy. Maybe I'm in a relationship, or at least, like, if not with a partner, then with uh, parents, with
Mhm.
colleagues, with bosses who are so, both men and women, absolutely shaped by the normalization of patriarchy that they don't even see it. You start to feel like you're sleeping with the enemy. You can't get away from it. You can't get a break. So how do you soothe yourself? Like once you've like discharged some anger, how are you soothing yourself um, relative to this predicament of living in patriarchy?
Um, if I lose the thread of the second question, please help me remember. I'm going to go to the
Well,
first question first, and then we'll come. So, in terms of moving into the fall and winter, two things come to mind. One is that based on my personal experience and my professional experience as a therapist, having supported many people over the past more than a decade. Yeah, I think it's a real thing that we're going into fall and winter. And on the one hand, it's like, oh yay, cozy sweater weather and like tea and I like my love for chai latte and like all this kind of stuff. Yeah, there can be like a really soothing kind of coziness around it. But one of the things that comes up is if the coziness is not accessible in your house, whether because you are moving through a challenging time with the people that you're living with, whether that's a partner or your children or your parents or whoever, um, or roommates or, that kind of thing. Maybe it's not going to feel super cozy and safe and good. Like maybe that's just like something that feels like it exists in movies but feels out of reach. Or I'll speak for myself. When I was moving through a period of deep grief, staying at home sometimes made me feel like although it was cozy, made like, oh man, there's so much, like it just felt like, ooh,
You're
like
just
I'm
kind of like sitting in
it
it.
just felt like, yeah, I was just like sitting in it. So to that point, when I was feeling like that, like can't get off the couch or the bed, yeah, I would, I like your saying, I'm not prey. I think for me, it was, um, like it changed. It changed from time to time, but it would be some version of this will not break me. Or it was like, um, I think uh, it was from Brene Brown's podcast from several years ago, like soft front, strong back, wild heart. Like sometimes that phrase helped me to do it, and I would literally like um, put my put the soles of my, like bend my knees, put the soles of my feet on the bed or the couch or the floor, and push the soles of my feet, activate the inner lines of the legs, like feel my sternum, feel my back body pressing in. And I would press intentionally to be like, look, you got a back. You're not, you're not mush. You know, you've got a back here, feel your back. And then once I felt like enough, like just minor like little activations in the body, if I had it within myself to get myself up, I would get myself up, I would go for a walk. If I didn't, and sometimes I didn't, I had a few people who were, you know, on speed dial on my phone, or sometimes I would text like girlfriend group chat or my sibling group chat, and I'd be like, help, anyone available for a 5-minute call? I need to get up and out. And yeah, usually someone would be like, yep, happy to, would give me a call. And it would just take that like anchoring to a safeness outside of myself to be like, okay, yeah. And then I could just like push, get up, and usually they would stay on the phone with me till I tied my shoes and got the dog on the leash, and I'd be like, okay, thanks, bye. You know, and that was really, really helpful. And I think that it's good to notice that, take note of that, and tell our safe people where we're at when we're having like days or weeks, or for some people months like that, and kind of normalize this collective care piece. Like so much goes into it. You just need a little bit of self-care. No, man, like we don't all need self-care all the time. Like my nice nails are not gonna make me like, you know, survive this like insurmountable amount of like sadness or grief or anger that I'm experiencing at this time. So I think it's important to do that.
Yeah, I like this idea of like an up and atom group kind of thing. It's like, yeah, as beautiful as it is to, yeah, maybe get nails done, or my facialist is not the person I actually really want to feel seen by right now. I want people who know my situation. But just a little group that's just like, hey, has anybody got 5 minutes? Like that, yeah, that seems really beautiful. Okay, so
I mean, I think
how do
also
you
the
see?
Numinous Network is a great space for that, right? Like I think that some people might also come to spaces like the Numinous Network where like maybe they don't have safe people, maybe they don't have a group of girlfriends, or
It's so true.
I'm very fortunate that my siblings and I are in a place now in our relationships where that feels safe for me to do. It hasn't always been the case, and it's something we've worked on and I've worked at, you know. So I think it's helpful to know that, like, and it's okay. It's okay if it's if those people aren't always in your like personal circle. There is this like wider collective, the Numinous Network being one of them.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's also like the reality of like, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago when you first started offering the extended therapeutic tremors, and like for me even to just show up and like camera off, just do my thing, but know that I'm like in community, and like that also felt like a safe space to learn the skills, to feel like seen in a way just by showing up. And I think that also helped the nervous system, especially in those moments a few years ago where I was experiencing so much freeze state, to learn safe mobilization into safe spaces.
Yes. Yes, totally.
So I think that that is also like helpful to know, and whether that's safe spaces in the physical world, which for me at times has been in the house, at times it has been out of the house, and or virtual spaces,
Hmm.
like
Totally.
specific people on the network or groups on the network, or then outside of that, friends and family. So I think
Totally.
it's
We have tons of people who come to the group somatics classes or like your contemplative grief class. They're not even coming necessarily for the content. They're coming for the contact nutrition and to be able to soothe or discharge or just mobilize, like, oh, right, this is, to stop gaslighting themselves and be like, yep, this is a real thing. And like you say, like to kind of mobilize or have that awareness in a safe space
yeah.
is maybe the only space they have. That's actually a very large percentage, I would say, of members of the Numinous Network do
Mhm.
not have this like we have, where it's like, hey, let's like dish about how white heteropatriarchy is pissing me off this week, whereas we do
Yeah.
it pretty frequently there.
I mean, and here's maybe like a lead into the second part of the question that you were asking. Like, what happens when you wake up and you're like, fuck, I'm sleeping with the enemy here, quote
Yeah,
unquote.
quote
Right?
unquote enemy.
So,
Yeah, it's the movie, Julia
yeah,
Roberts.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that this is actually a really good point. For those who are listening to this, or they're in the exploration phase of like the things that have been pushed down or minimized in order to be nice and fit in and make nice with people and make life as smooth as possible, specifically for other people, not necessarily for themselves. And then they're like, oh crap, like I'm in it and I don't know how to get out of it. I think maybe one of the things is this, like, find the people who will either guide you into safe spaces or share safe spaces with you, to have a container into which you can explore what the truth of it is for you, finding the words for yourself. Not every word that maybe a facilitator uses in a session might be the right words for each individual. However, the more exposure they have to that, or tools they can gain, the more they can be like, and how does this live in my life? How is it real in my life? Given that, okay, I live in this particular house, let's say, and it's really under the spell of white heteropatriarchy, what is safe for me to walk into? What kinds of conversations could I bring forward? Is it time to say, we need a family therapist or a couples therapist? Or are we actually at a stage where it's like, actually, we all listen to the same podcast while we are like cooking, and then we chat about it over dinner? Or, it depends based on the people that, you wake up next to. But I think it's worthwhile knowing, like, how can I resource myself? How can I know that I'm not alone in, I don't know, like fighting the good fight? Like, I think it can feel very overwhelming and or maybe even like
Futile.
impossible. Like, yes, futile. Like, it might feel like that. So especially when we don't have examples of other folks who've walked through it, or like people real to us, or virtual, or stories, or myths, or even drawing from ancient stories from different lineages, or exploring information from like our own ancestral lines, or there's so many different ways to go about resourcing ourselves when we are finally ready to say, hey, this BS is not working for me, and in fact, actually, I don't think it's working for you either.
Yeah.
Can we please get into honest conscious conversation about it, so that we can all live a more mutually beautiful and peaceful and loving coexistence.
Totally.
Without those resources and stories and like things to like, I mean, and this is coming from the person who like packed my bag full of tools and tools and tools, and it still in some ways wasn't working for me until I was like, okay, no, I need different ways to get the conversation across, or I need a space to say, hey, I'm trying this conversation, it's fucking going nowhere, help somebody.
Totally. I think like
Yeah.
when you're swimming in patriarchy when you're in an invalidating environment. Like when you're just feeling invalidated over and over, patriarchy is afoot. And so you need to have somebody who's like, so that sounds like patriarchy, and like give you language and kind of give you a framework or a lens. And also some kinds of, you know, lifelines or like a sense of agency. Like it was a really big deal to me to realize like I'm just going to make some very quiet personal choices here. One is I'm not going to give my time to white men, basically. I was like, I'm just not anymore. The relationships that I had, I was going to focus on the one with my husband. And like pretty much outside of that, it's like, if there isn't a baseline of reciprocity, I'm not picking that up anymore. I'm just not doing more than my fair share here anymore. So guess what? There's just like not that many white men in my life. So I actually don't experience a ton of patriarchy until I'm like going to the doctor or something like that. I'm not going to give my money to them. So like, I'm just not taking those courses. I'm not buying those books. I'm not watching those movies. I'm just not. And so I just kind of did a bit of a cleanse, a bit of a detox. And I'm like super duper selective about where I'm directing my money. I'm just not going to direct my money to like, even if they're like, quote unquote, a good one, nice guy. It's like, no, I want to live my politics, but my beliefs, but I want to redistribute this elsewhere. I've just given enough. I've lived in the white man's imagination for most of my life, from like school and English literature and just everything. I've lived in the imagination of a middle-aged white man since I was born, pretty much, and in my education and culture. So I'm just going to pull focus to other voices. And also just deciding I'm just not going to vote for white men. I know it's the Green Party. Hey, but if you can't come up with something better than this, if you can't give me more options, I'm just not going to do that. Like, I'm just not. And people can fight me on that. Everybody has their own thing. Like, I get it. That's going to be very activating. But I think finding your own kind of parameter of like, how am I going to live in a different imagination is a lot of agency, but you need to find those environments that are created out of a different imagination that make you feel validated. It's like oxygen. It makes it so much easier to name that's what's happening. And like, that's another thing we do in the network. That's totally didn't mean to be like a plug for the network show, but like I will say that is one thing that every guide, this is our agreement, they're gonna like sometime in the first 15 minutes or so, or at some point in every session, they're gonna name capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist patriarchy as the main shaper of our neurobiology, and that we are going to shape our neurobiology in a different way now. So yeah, I think we do have to find ways to soothe and connect on it and live in this predicament. Of course, we're trying to unhook it, but we're unhooking from it, but we're still trying to survive within it. And it can be like a pretty confusional field at times. Yeah. So Taraneh, I'm very excited for your session, which is New Year, where we're going to explore anger and movement and processing and things like that. Can you tell us the story of how movement ancestrally has been really important, like an important thread? I'm just like so delighted when, we're talking about ancestral work or we're connecting with the witch within, and then you like discovered something really important that your family didn't think to tell you. What was it?
Yeah. In recent time, I discovered that as part of my ancestral heritage, there was a matrilineal line of nomads. Now, I have always kind of felt myself pulled towards moving. I when I was doing my master's, I focused on movement therapy as one of like my uh
Like
yeah,
thesis?
focal points of
Focal
like,
point,
yeah,
yeah.
my work. And I really had explored it like for myself, and it certainly comes into my therapeutic work. And I had no idea that there was this like beautiful history of my people moving across land and living with the land and on the land and in relationship to the land. And that movement is part of the way in which they found ease and peace and meaning in their lives. And so for me, it's been this like, I don't know, just heartfelt kind of homecoming experience of realizing that this actually has existed
Mm.
in my lineage. And like these visions that I've had in certain experiences that I've had, one of them with you in one of the work pieces that of work that we've done together, of like very clear visuals of well ancestors who are guiding me being nomadic, but I actually didn't know that it was real. I didn't know that that was a thing. So that's been really beautiful. And in my own life and in my own like practice, personal and professional, this idea of continuing to move in the seasons, with the seasons, in the land, with the land, in relationship to the land, is really, has been really healing and really impactful for me. For me, also, it's been like a deep place of inspiration for my writing, which is also very meaningful and healing and like a creative outlet for me. So in many ways, a lot of the time, come rain or shine, I'm out walking anywhere, and there always seems to be some kind of wisdom from the land or metaphor that's just like way too obvious to miss. Or some of the time I walk and I ask the question. I just start the walk and I say, let's say I'm feeling confused that day. I say like, I'm ready to receive some insight. My eyes and heart are open, or I'm listening. And it might be that I see an eagle that day, or it might be that the stream is overflowing and abundant, or it might be that um, a magnificent mushroom is growing on somewhere on a log, and I think about like that nurse tree and like the reciprocity of the forest. Like it could be any of those things, and all of it, like without a doubt, every time I'm out, if I'm moving with intentionality, the messages and the healing are well received. I think as long as again, it's like blinders are not on. I am alive. I am present. I am asking to be in relationship. I'm thanking the land I'm stepping on. I'm thanking the trees and the sky. And like, even if it's cloudy and it's pissing rain, like I'm allowing myself to be nurtured by it. I do always get nurtured by it, which is one of the reasons that I created this program called Woods and Words for the fall and winter months, which invites people to come along with me, come along on those walks, and they receive like virtual or like auditory little like mini podcast audio thing, 15 minutes ish, to take along on their walk, and with these types of invitations weekly to get them through those months where it's harder to get out and get moving, but the
Yeah.
land is still there to nourish us if we allow it.
We're definitely going to link to Woods and Words in the show notes. I'm glad you brought it up. I was going to mention it. And also, you taking like spirited poets in the wild out and things. There's like things that people can do in person and virtually wherever they are. So we'll definitely put links in the show notes. Aside from moving and walking, how else are you going to nurture the witch within this fall and winter?
My altar game is currently so good. I am loving my altar game right now. I feel like it's been a practice that has been like coming and going for me throughout the years. And for many years, I didn't have like the space or like the safety to be in relationship with myself, the world, and ancestors around it, but and spirit world. And now I'm at a place where it feels really good. So I keep my altars. I have a few very alive, which feels wonderful. I'm super excited about my burn bundle that I made. Plug for your book and your offerings. I have them. I have a couple of them, and one will be burned close to the witch's New Year time, and fires. And for me, some of it is like elemental, like relationship with the fire. I live close by a river, so relationship with the earth and the water in like all of those seasons. So yeah, my witchiness is coming out in those things at this time. It's like, yeah, lots of bringing the outdoors in, watering crystal bowls, rocks and gems, taking things down to the river, like offering things to the river, bringing something back from the river that could, sit on the altar for a month or a season or something. So kind of that feels, yeah, that's what's happening.
It feels delectable. It's so sensual, just like you. Thank you so much for sharing your anger and sharing your containment and the beautiful space you hold for anger and exploration of like what might be in the shadow, what might be there that could maybe surprise us with its potency. I'm very excited for us to I'm excited to be a participant, but I'm excited for us to share it with everyone, which is New Year. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
It's my absolute delight and pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
If this episode resonated for you, you are so not alone, my friend. And yeah, maybe you'll come hang out with us in the network. Maybe you'll come hang out with us at which is New Year. Definitely you will want to check out Taraneh's Instagram, Mind on Spirit, and you'll find links to Taraneh's offerings in the show notes in your podcast player or at numinouspodcast.com. I'll also put some links for you to learn more about the Women Life Freedom Movement, just to educate yourself, stay updated, and keep supporting. My listener shout out today. Here's a very special review from Jessie Harold entitled A Must Read for Kitchen Witches and Muggles Alike. The Spirited Kitchen is such an amazing book. First of all, it is incredibly well informed, and the introduction alone is worth a read if you're interested in how to explore spirituality, witchcraft, and ancestral veneration with integrity. The recipes are amazing. The potato gratin is now on regular rotation at our holiday dinners. I've started holding Wheel of the Year gatherings inspired by the Spirited Kitchen, and it is helping me grow my community and my spiritual practice. Thanks, Jessie. That, I can't even tell you how gratifying and inspiring that is. And I've seen photographic proof of this on Instagram because she tagged me in some, I think it was Belton photos, I believe. They looked great. It's exactly what I hope the Spirited Kitchen would do, is inspire gatherings in nature to celebrate the micro seasons wherever you are, to encourage regular pauses, to reconnect and to ground in our values. Jesse's doing that in a really beautiful way. Thank you to everyone who's left a review on the Spirited Kitchen. And finally, Witches New Year is happening on Saturday, October 28th. Taraneh is going to be holding a session. So if you feel like after this episode, you're like, I need some aftercare, then you will want to mark October 28th on your calendar. Recordings will be available if you're busy that day, so you'll want to get your ticket nonetheless. Taraneh is just a fabulous facilitator and very experienced, very compassionate, and we can hold you in this shared predicament, friends. We have an incredible lineup to help us hunker down and keep cozy during that day. It's an eclipse day, actually, so we're not going to do big magic this year that's like sort of contraindicated on eclipses, but we are going to gather to learn about the astrology of this eclipse, as well as what's in the stars for 2024. We're going to learn some perspectives on anti-fascist folklore, embodiment for the witch wound with Taraneh, as I mentioned. We'll do a deep dive into the tarot card of the year for 2024, the strength card, as well as an ancestral veneration session with special attention towards queer and non-binary ancestors, as well as those ancestors who were childless, yet integral to the lineage. It's going to be a fun and fascinating day. Make sure you're on my newsletter to receive the announcement when tickets go on sale, so we will see you there. Come hang out with me and Taraneh there. Sign up for my newsletter at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.